ideas for the next sessions and all this. So we have a couple of webinars going. Maybe I can start by describing that very quickly. So we had our foundational series of webinars last year, going through the basics of FHIR. They are not trainings; they are just for awareness. But now we want to follow those, so to follow that trend. We want to have, first of all, as of this month, we'll have those webinars in French and in Spanish, and then we'll continue our webinars on more FHIR topics. So we're still cooking up the plan for that, but there will be other things, new things on FHIR, detailed sessions on specific topics. So we'll continue those throughout this year, and to prepare those and also these sessions. It's always good to see what people are doing. Are people already doing FHIR, not doing FHIR? Does anyone have a pain point or some cool ideas to share? So I would open up for those things. What are the things that we want to do? Hola, Pablo. Things that we want to do in FHIR, and yeah, what are the things that we want to discuss here?
On that note, I think we can open it up to whomever might have a topic to introduce, a question, a comment, a feeling, a thought, anything. Floor is up to our participants, so please feel free to come off mute and share your experiences and questions.
If you're camera shy like I am, but you're not obliged to be on camera or on audio, just type it in the chat. It's okay.
Hey, Jose, it's Carl. One question that we chatted about a little earlier, but maybe this is a good time to figure out a bit more, is there's a new testing resource that's coming out in FHIR. Can you maybe just give a bit of an overview around that and where you see it fitting into the whole standard specification, maybe some use cases of how we should be thinking about utilizing that?
I can. Maybe I'll share my screen if it's okay with everyone. Oh, I cannot. The host does not enable that.
Try it now. See if I fixed it.
Yep, that works.
Cool, thank goodness.
So can you see the screen that is showing the FHIR specification now?
Yep, it's there.
Yep. So this is as it says in the web browser, the FHIR draft final release of FHIR. So we are doing QA. So for those of you not caring or not knowing, the FHIR release R5 is coming out soon, and this is the final draft, which is going to be subject to some minor QA stuff. Some text might change, but the structure of FHIR is pretty much fixed now. One of the things that we managed to include kind of a last minute, because we really wanted to have something, is a new resource called Test Plan. Let me see if I can find it here. I should be able to find it here. So Test Plan is a draft resource. It's maturity level 0, meaning that it has just been approved to do, or it has just been accepted that we should try it out. It has not even been approved as one of the main resources one of the resources that are in FHIR. Not that it makes a lot of difference. It just gives a very strong signal to the community to say we really want this to be tried out. So the FHIR specification produces this, and the scope and intent of this is to say, when you publish a specification, so everything in FHIR is computable. One thing in FHIR that is not computable or is not computable until now is how do you test this? So if you say this is an actor, or this is a search parameter, or this is a capability statement, all of those are computable things. The how to test this was not computable. So it was just narrative text. The implication of that is that the reason why you have computable artifacts is, first of all, the content can be processed and automated somehow. Also, it can be versioned so that every resource in FHIR has an ID. So if you say I have my capability statement, I have a unique ID for that. and I have a version. So if I want to improve that, then to improve the capability statement or the actor definition, whatever I'm defining, I can version those things. So I can create repositories of those computable specifications, implementation guides, actor definitions, search parameters, etc. Or plan definitions, things that we're using intensely in the SMART guidelines. But if you have all of those things computable, versions, uniquely identified, but then the test plan is a blob of text, it's very hard to keep track of how close is the, how different does the test plan need to be, or where are the different versions of the test plan? Does my test plan version 2 still meet the requirements of my capability statement version 3? So that is one of the reasons. The other thing is, when we define test plans, there are kind of established or common practices for doing test plans. So the test plan basically says what's the canonical URL, so where is it usually hosted, a unique identifier or several unique identifiers if people give different names to the same things, versions, names, all these things that are just for publication purposes or for governance purposes. And then it starts with saying this is the scope. So this test plan, this resource, is a computable expression or is a structured expression of how to test this, and this is the scope here. And then we have a couple of things. So test tools is typically when you say, in order to do this, you should have the following tools available, whether this is Instant OpenHIE or this is Postman. So those are the things that you need to have. Then dependencies. So again, a structured way of saying, are these dependencies there? So you have a description there. So you just structure them so that you can actually see if you're missing any of those. And then what are the dependencies are for saying, before you test this, you should be able to do that. So if you are on test plan that is, I don't know, user acceptance testing, you should basically do or commonly do the unit testing before that, or the smoke test, or whatever we want to name them. This is a way to say, before doing this, or don't bother doing this if you haven't done the other ones before. So that's one of the things that we are structuring here, is the dependency chain. Then there's the test case itself, so how to test things, and that can be very computable testing. So script tests like Gherkin, FHIR test scripts, Postman collections, all of those things are possible or are supported there. It's just content that goes into a place, and this is really a big envelope, a very big structured envelope for all of these things. It supports narrative, but also supports these things to be in place. How to do the test, and the data that you need for those tests. So if you have the test data there, and test data can be a pointer to actual data, or can be a pointer to something that allows you to create test data. For example, if your test data is going to be synthetic, then you can point to the scripts or to the descriptions in Cynthia, or any other way of creating the test data, because you don't want, or you don't need to have the 10,000 resources at hand, always available. You can, if they are just random resources or synthetically generated resources, you can just say, I want my resources to be 10,000 patients with these sequential IDs and random names. If you can do this if you want to do this in a descriptive way rather than enumerating all of those, then it's also fine. And finally, the assertions is what is expected. So at the end of the test, this should fail, this should pass. For example, one of the test run could have several scripts here, and the script could say, first thing, you post the patient. Second thing, you post another patient with the same name. Third thing, you post another patient with the same ID and the same name. At the end, and the fourth step is query the number of patients with that name. At the end, you should have 3, if I remember what I said correctly, because the fourth one, you should have 2, because the third one was a patient with the same ID and so the same ID and the same name. And let's assume that the functionality that we are describing is that the patients can have same names, but no patient can have the same ID. So by the second patient, you create a patient ID. The third post that you do, will fail. So the assertion is that the third post will fail, and the search should only return 2 patients, because in fact only 2 of those posts of the 3 posts that you did were successful. So this is pretty much the content. What we expect to do with it is to have this as part of implementation guide. So let me just see. I was just looking at one now. MRS. So if you have an implementation guide, you can have, for example, the search parameter. The idea is that we have the description of the search parameter, and then you have a new tab here saying, this is how you test it. So this is the search parameter, and then this is how you test it. Or the whole implementation guide that can have a, this is how you test it. And I'll shut up here. The fact that this is computable means that you can say, okay, I'm going to select what part of the implementation guide I want to test. With this, I will pick up the test plan that are associated with it, and that should be able to feed or to help feed the testing process, whether that is very automated, if everything is in there, or that is very manual. At least we have a checklist of the things that we need to test. Yeah, so since every resource that we define could have 1 or more test plans associated with it, that's how I see it working. The idea is to push it and to trial it out, so that by the next release of FHIR, which is going to be, I don't know, a few years from now, we should have a rather mature resource from implementers' feedback. Carl, does it answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Does it trigger any thoughts, any ideas?
Again, the floor is open to any follow-up questions, any new topics, completely open. And as Jose said earlier, if you're shy, you can always put it in the chat, but feel free.
For those that are not familiar, I abhor awkward silences, so I'll keep talking as long as no one talks for me. Is anyone doing testing? Is anyone doing testing on FHIR? Anyone in this call doing efforts for FHIR testing and for FHIR testing tooling processes? Is anyone doing that? I cannot see the chat. I don't know if there's anyone in the chat.
The only thing in chat is Linda asking if you can share the link to the draft test resource page.
Yep, I will. Well, it's easy. So basically, if you go to build.fhir.org, because it's now on build, / test plan, and that should get you there.
She says
no one is
thank
doing
you.
testing. Huh? Sorry?
She says thank you.
No one is doing FHIR testing, or no one is admitting they are doing FHIR testing, or no, is it? Everyone thinks that they are not going to do FHIR testing. I have news for you. You will be doing FHIR testing. How is the adoption level of FHIR now? So if you don't mind putting it on the chat, so what are you doing with FHIR? Are you doing FHIR? Are you not doing FHIR? I would like to have a feeling of the people in the call. What's happening there? Are you joining this because you want to know FHIR? Are you joining this because you know FHIR and you want to see what others are doing? Any thoughts? Any ideas? Feel free to post it. If not, I'll just, so as we are expecting any ideas, any thoughts, or any problems. Like the last time we had a session, there was a colleague from Germany. Hello. I don't see it there. Yeah.
Yes, Savella here. So I had a question on the testing resource. So this being a resource, it means you do the profiling and load the testing resource on a FHIR server, and then the FHIR server takes over, or do you, as a developer, do you need to like consider writing any specific scripts that would be doing the actual testing?
in my view, I would say you should make the test scripts as part of your test design process as normal. I don't know if the test plan would reside on a FHIR server, like a normal FHIR server for clinical purposes, like the other resources, like patient and medication, etc. But it would be somewhere. Maybe it would be indeed a FHIR server for these things. Normally, we would start with having those hosted or having those published, the test plans as part of the implementation guide. So they will be somewhere available on the cloud, like we have the other resources. So we can say, oh, this is the canonical URL for this test plan. Let's see what it says, and then, as you know, the machines can do this. So if you have an implementation guide that mentions a test plan, for example, if we have an implementation that says, I don't define a test plan, I just import the test plan that is defined in the IHE or in the FHIR layer, we can do those. So they will be hosted maybe on a web server because they are canonical resources, or maybe indeed on a FHIR server if we want to do it. But yes, the expectation is that either you describe the test plan in a narrative format, and then someone has to design the test cases for that. Or ideally, if you want those test cases to be reusable, which I would like to have, then you, as part of defining your specification, you actually define the test cases as much as possible and the test scripts for those. I would really like to have that, because that it's not just because it's technically more complete, it has a very powerful impact on one thing that is really important for me, which is you only finish the specifications when you know that how to test them. Because if you don't know how to test them, there is always a bit of possible ambiguity and leeway for implementations to have two different flavors of the same thing. But if you say, and I had that experience, if you go back to your business owners and say, this is how we are going to test this. If we do this, it passes. If we do this, it fails. That simple dialogue, that ping pong of if we do this, does it fail? Does it test? Do you mean this? That's really a very powerful discussion in completing the specifications, in making sure the specifications are not thrown over the wall to the next guy, but actually everyone is on board on this. So that's, I hope that answers the question, Sovelo, and thank you for that, because it's an important point that I was forgetting.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification.
Jenny.
Hey, I would be curious if you want to talk about some of the challenges related to items and the work that you've been doing with that for R5.
Items?
Thinking about, medications and how things are kind of handled differently and set up differently. Yeah.
If you mean items as trade items, like product things, right? Yeah. So another thing that we introduced in FHIR really recently, and that was upon the demand of having a solution for a problem that was not perceived first in FHIR, is the inventory resource. Actually, I was going to navigate, but I can just click and type inventory item. So the inventory item is a new resource as well. It expects to address one kind of gap or one perceived gap in FHIR. FHIR is designed for clinical use. So if you're making a prescription, you're making a prescription for a medication. So you need a resource called medication. But then if you're making a request for a device, then you make another type of resource, a device request, that uses a different resource, a device. And then you have biologically derived products. So if you want blood or something that's derived from biological tissues, human or not, then you have another resource for that. And after some iterations, or after this got developed, we realized that those were clinically very different, and therefore they were modeled in a very different way. And then we tried to see, okay, how can I search for, just searching for, I'll make a simple search, like, I don't know if this is considered a device or a medication. So many products are in that boundary zone, like sponges with coagulants. Is that a device or is it a medication? That's ambiguous. There's lots of products that are in that boundary. And if we want to do things like, especially on the inventory and supply chain, I want to see how many of those I have. Or I want to make a simple inventory or a simple catalog of the items that are ready to be distributed by this warehouse, or where can I buy this or that product. That turned out to be extremely difficult because, well, the name is here. Unless it's a medication, the name is there, but if it's a device, the name is there. That inconsistency caused some issues. So last year or 2 years ago, FHIR introduced a thing called the product pattern, but it's just a product pattern. It's just a guidance. The fact is that different resources they have. Let me see if I have the links here. I can open those links. You can see the medication resource is a bit different from the device resource. And the biologically derived product is different, very different from the nutrition products and the medication. And for the medication, we have not one resource, but several resources, like medicinal product definition, etc. So I'll just show it. It was really difficult to have some consistency there because these things, they take a life of their own. So this is the biologically derived product, which is focusing really on how did you collect it and what were the conditions for that. And then the rest is just a bunch of properties. For nutrition product, it's a bit different. So you just focus on what is inside of it, not how it was captured, but what's inside of it. Does it have allergens or not? And it has a thing called instance when you put, for example, the identifier as the serial number. Whereas if you go to the device, it has a thing called serial number. So if you just want to see, I have to do something like, I have a barcode here, I want to scan it, and I want to know what it is. The answer in FHIR was, well, it really depends if this is a medication, if this is a device or a nutrition product. So we introduced a new thing, also trial, and this one must be really well exercised, otherwise it's not. It overlaps or potentially overlaps so much with the others that it might be causing disturbance, and confusion to the implementer. So we have to be very careful. But this is to say, inventory item is, I don't really care what it is, if it's a medication or a device. I just know that I have a box here that has a barcode and a serial number and a lot number, and has been, traveling at this temperature. So these are the kind of, and weighs 1 kilo. So those are the things that we care about. If you are in the supply chain, that's pretty much what we want to know. We don't care if inside a box there is a thing that the hospital calls a device, but the pharmacy calls a medication. And that confusion was something that we struggled with. Since we have a couple of initiatives on the supply chain and on the catalogs, a logistics catalog that needed something like just a product with characteristics, this is our placeholder for that. Yeah, and the driver for that was that difficulty in knowing upfront or mapping upfront. You have one thing, one GTIN, one number, one serial number. How is a developer expect to map this to 3 or 4 different resource types? That doesn't work. So we just have, now we have a thing called inventory item, which is a thing or a box of things or something inside a box of things. And we can just characterize it with more attributes. And then we give it a serial number or an identifier, a lot number, expiry date, and we say if it's somewhere or if it's attached to someone, we say who has this and where is it. And that's pretty much it. Jenny, I don't know if this is...
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. It's exciting to see this is like come so far. It's reminding me too, so we're working on that other interoperability toolkit recently, like going through some of the challenges from there was a paper from USAID around challenges experienced with Ebola, and the challenges just, having supply orders in different, it was kind of beyond units of measures and things, but talking about it in different ways and, the interoperability challenges there. So this is exciting.
There was a recent discussion about how does FHIR work with GS1? And this is actually a good example. So to do this inventory item resource, and I think there's a reference over there. Basically, so FHIR is focused on the HL7 experience, like the RIM, so the reference information model, HL7 version 2, HL7 version 3 CDA. So that's the background that FHIR has. The people that have been working on FHIR, that's typically where they come from. But logistics is not a thing in FHIR, so it was not a very common thing. So there's in HL7 version 2, for example, there was something there, but it was not very commonly used. But it was really important because then you want to have, for example, prescriptions, and you want to see, can I prescribe this medication knowing that at night the distribution, so that the hospital ward does not have stock because the closet is closed or whatever. Can I prescribe this, or should I prescribe this one? Because then they can always come to the pharmacy to get it, or this is freely available to pick up, or I have more quantity of these, so I should prescribe these ones and not the other ones. So the clinical versus supply, it's not a very broad separation. And when we did this, this is the first attempt. This actually, quick look at the SAP system, but mostly on GS1. So GS1 has a thing called trade item because they have seen this for many years, that things will be difficult. So they have a thing called, I think, product with batteries. So they have a specification for a product that has batteries. They have a thing for medications. They have lots of specializations of products, but they all have one upper abstraction, which is the trade item. So they know that they will have trade items flying around, and the trade item can be a box of boxes, etc. Can be a box with medications, can be a box with medications and a syringe, can be a box with ampoules and a syringe and a tablet. That is their business, so they know how to do this, and we just got a lot of info. Basically, this is pretty much not copy pasted, but saying, okay, does this exist? Okay, then is it relevant? Yes, let's put it there. So there was lots of alignment with the GS1 initiative to make something that works well in the supply chain area.
Thank you.
I hope people are interested in this, because we really need to test this out and show how this works. The sad thing, but the good thing for this, is that until 3 years ago, supply chain was not a concern, because the people that were driving the standards, typically they were coming from places where supply chain issues of drugs do not exist. Because if you don't have it here, you go to the next door, or if you need 10, you order 100, and then you have enough stock. Then a few years ago, something happened that made everyone realize that logistics and supply chain of products and inventory of items is not something that you can take for granted. There's a lot depending on that, and really whether people get healthcare or not, whether they can continue with their lives, is really depending on something as simple as the truck arrived safely at the location? Do we know how many units of the vaccine have arrived safely at that location? Can we call people to get vaccinated, etc.? So this logistics challenge is something that we learn. Everyone learned the same lesson that many of the LMICs have been experiencing for many years. Cool. Jenny, thanks for the notes. Is anyone else working on supply chain and distribution and inventory? I guess not. So one of the things that I would like to build up, so from these sessions we have interesting ideas, interesting things to do, some challenges that are not yet resolved or not yet addressed. Maybe creating a sort of just thinking out loud, like resources for looking at this. Like, if we want to see where was this, there was a session where we discussed supply chain. These were the links. So maybe it would be good for us to build that repository of useful information. I don't know how much curated that can be, but it would be interesting to continue capturing this. I think we keep track of those things, but looking back, there's been quite a few interesting things that, for example, if I look now at the things that we discussed 2 years ago, I would be not ashamed, but almost, because things have developed so far, so there has been so much progress then. So I would say, well, this was good at the time, but now there's a new resource or there's a new initiative. Yeah, maybe maintaining that kind of reference information for topics. I have no idea how this would be structured, but there is so much knowledge that we just keep discussing here, and people come up with cool stuff that it would be interesting to track. Sorry, I just came from a meeting where we were like, how do we onboard people on FHIR? How do we help people get on FHIR? And how do we help people with standards? Well, we need those things to be in a catalog of resources or so, and not in the heads of 5, 10, 100 people. They should be out there. Anything else? Any issues? Anyone that has not joined these sessions before and they have any expectations for these sessions? I know the easiest thing is just to come up and see what are those guys talking about, but if you have expectations, you can say, oh, I have this problem, or I'm not familiar with this, or I have no idea what they are talking about. It would be nice to know that. I see a few new names. I don't want to call names, but I would like to ask if people are.
I can jump in, actually. You actually mentioned a topic that I thought would be really interesting, that you just came from a meeting about how to help people get onboarded into FHIR. And I'm curious, either for you or for other folks on the call, like, what was the most helpful resource if you were starting from scratch?
Thank you. Something that stays with you. So it depends on what you want to do, but this thing, chat.fhir.org.
Yeah. And I could say this is much more broadly, right? I realize that people starting from scratch may be coming at this from different ways, but I'm curious, like, to your point of like how we help get folks onboarded, what is like, what are people turning to? What's missing? Right. What's the frequently asked questions? Yeah,
depends on. So actually, my counter question to that to the other meeting was, depends on who you are. So if you want to get on board on FHIR as a developer, then there's a couple of resources. If you want to get on board on FHIR as a business analyst, then maybe you are looking at different things. If you want to implement something that someone has designed, that's one set of skills. If you want to develop the specifications for systems, that's a slightly different set of skills. One of the things that we were thinking is, but at the end, there is a couple of, so we had a FHIR webinar last year, 2 years ago, about FHIR search. And there was something that came out of this that I considered very useful for me as well, which is, instead of knowing this, I'm just going to create a Postman collection or something similar, so that every time that I want to know how to do this search, I don't have to remember or read the documentation. It's there. That actually helped me as well in terms of exercises. Like one thing is reading the specification, which is useful as a reference, but not, let's say, as a bedtime reading. But so having reference implementations, we have a bunch of those. Having the webinars that we have, like introductory webinars, like, do you want to know what terminology is? Go and watch this video or read this presentation. So those are some of the resources. The other things, and that's what I was thinking, is maybe like a starter kit or whatever. Like, here's a couple of exercises that you should do, which actually could be basically a test plan, just to see, do I have a server? But there's a couple of things that we have, like setting up a FHIR server, looking at making a FHIR client, whether with Postman or doing this in a specific language. So there's a couple of things that can be done for people that want to get their hands more dirty and say, oh, I know, I've read the spec and I've tried a couple of searches, I created a couple of patients, I created a couple of requests, and I've seen the whole thing working and not working when it shouldn't, or I discovered that my requirements were not clear, or my client did not have that facility. So these, I would say, these pillars. So educational materials, we are building those up. It would be really good to have input on, what else do people need to be educated in, or no, not educated in the sense of what they need to be aware of. The other thing is reference implementations. We have a couple of them. Also these exercises and things that we can just try out. Like, I want to run through this sequence of exercises like I can do search. Okay, let me search for a patient. Now let me search for a patient and their prescription. Now let me search for a patient and their prescription, and watch it fail because I don't have access to that patient's information. So those things could be interesting to continue. And at the end, there's one thing that really helps. The one thing that's really in the nature of the FHIR. So in the core of the success of FHIR, there is the community focus. So whenever someone says, I don't know what's happening, or I don't know where to start, just go to chat.fhir.org, create an account, it's free, and then ask. There's lots of people willing to help. Whether you're saying, I have a super complicated application and I have this thing, but this server is not working, who can help me with the Java language or whatever? There's always a space for that. Or I have no idea what FHIR is, and I want to start something. Can someone help me? If they cannot, they will find someone who can, or they will do like I do many times, which is, this is a cool idea. We need to get this there. Yeah. So Rebecca, does that satisfy your question?
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. I'm curious if there's, I'm curious from other folks on the line if they've found other materials as well.
Jose, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah.
So I think Rebecca actually asked a very good question, because I feel like there's a lot of attention to FHIR, but I think now we need to get to a point of like, how do we get different audiences involved in FHIR? And I think to your point earlier, you mentioned business analysts. And for me, from my perspective, I would say like business analysts should actually not get right away into FHIR, but go from like, the process of looking at digital adaptation kits from the WHO SMART guidelines kind of work. And then for like engineers and maybe like, folks that are a bit more inclined to be like, I would say like geeks or systems analysts, I would say definitely looking at logical models. I mean, it depends. Everybody actually has an experience or a previous work experience, I would say, that brings certain set of filters. So I think FHIR being so rich, I think we also almost have to consider like a set of different, like, I would say like path into FHIR based on your previous work or your previous experience. And I think, Jose, you had in the past, evoked something like the train lines or the bus lines or something. I don't know if you want to mention some of this, but I think it's definitely something that we need to actually consider, as the community around FHIR has to really come from different angles. And we need to be able to bridge the fact that they may be coming in with certain presets or certain filters that may need to be addressed as they get into FHIR, not to be overwhelmed and to really take it on the right way.
Yep. No, definitely. That's awesome. So yeah, on the education paths, I think if you look at the FHIR trainings, they are very technical at this moment, which is fine, because then you want to have technical expertise, because FHIR is a technical standard. However, sometimes you don't want to go that deep on the technical level, or you even in the technical level, you want to focus more on the tooling, or you want to focus more on the testing, or you want to focus more on the development of guidance, or you want to focus more on development of backend servers or the front end. So all those paths, they do exist, and each one has their experience, their preferences, depending not only on their past, but also on their foreseeable futures. If my job is to do front end, then I'll have to study the front end things. So one of the things that would be really good to have this community, so this group of people, finding a way that we can discuss, for example, through the chat.fhir.org, to see what are the needs out there. So someone came to us some months ago and said, we need to teach FHIR to this other audience, or we need to get people on board on FHIR. What does it mean? And then we came up with a couple of personas. So if you're a business analyst, or if you're a developer, or if you're an implementation guide author, so someone that develops the specifications, these are the things that you might need to have, the skills that you might need to have. And from this, we started defining the paths. Like if you want to get to that point, if you start from a very strong technical background, then you have to take this train. So you have to take this subway line to say that takes you from, I'm technically proficient in JSON XML, but I have no idea how FHIR works. Okay, here's the plan. We have resources, we have search mechanisms, we have all these things. At the end, we say, by the end of this journey, you will be proficient in actually implementing or designing an implementation guide. If you're more on the developer side, well, maybe you don't care so much about that. So it's short, a little while before taking the implementation guide design session, for you as a developer persona, you would more focus more on the implementation of this, and then there's a bunch of reference implementation libraries of languages that you might want to use, because your job is not to create specifications, so not talking FHIR for the sake of FHIR like we do in specifications, but to actually implement those specifications. And one persona that is kind of there, still waiting for something to happen, is the non-technical person. I do not know if that will be one persona or two personas, but the people that have kind of really like a high-level business analyst that really doesn't want to know what is a search parameter. He just wants to know that it should be possible to search all the medications for a patient, but only for this patient, not for all the patients, because otherwise that would be a privacy risk. And maybe the people that are sitting even on the other level, which is, I'm from the Ministry of Health. I want to start FHIR in my country. I don't want to know FHIR, but I want people to know FHIR. I need to know, do I start working groups in my country? Do I put my people in the international groups and then, lose track of them? How do I create the FHIR knowledge and awareness in my country, or in my jurisdiction, or in my project, or in my company? How does it start? And those are a couple of things that I think, my opinion is that they are still open out there. So there is no clear answer for that. I don't know if this echoes in your minds. So if there's any feedback on, is this worth pursuing? Is this something that people are interested in? Is there lots of interest for this? Or you only do FHIR once your boss tells you to do FHIR. So that need is pretty much already met by definition. I don't know. I think there's the gap, but I'm not so sure. Anyone?
Yeah, so I think for me, like from my own experience on the FHIR website, I think that they have like a getting started page where they have the general introduction, and they have the getting started specifically for the clinicians and for like developers, system architects, and business analysts. I think depending on someone's background, if they go into those pages and like really concentrate, try to understand, they are really very, very helpful, because most of the time when you meet someone and you ask about FHIR, it usually goes down to like FHIR is an HL7 standard and everything there is a resource, and most of the discussion will be around resources and implementation guides, and all these things don't really make sense to someone who is pretty new to the standard. So I think the getting started page would be very useful for anyone like wanting to get to understand what really FHIR is, depending on their background.
Thank you, Savello. Yeah, and just reacting to that, and I think we can do even better. So, for example, if I explain REST to a clinician, to a pharmacist, for example, they will say yes. They will say yes to whatever, because they will be lost. They will be tuning out. However, if I say, you know what, let me just show you. Here's a Postman thing or whatever, or here's a very small application that just shows, here's a server. The server contains something. It's JSON file. You don't have to care about this. But if we do this, then if you do this again. So I think there's maybe demonstrators of these basic things in a way that the language makes sense, because sometimes we are talking to people that don't know and don't care, don't have to know what a server is. So it's a repository of things. If we tell them there is a computer somewhere, or part of the computer that just contains all the patients, you just create new patients, you update the patients, and that thing will keep registry of what you have. Sometimes that's the kind of language that we might have to address. I hope not too often, but yeah, maybe I think there's also maybe some things to be done on explaining even the basics or demonstrating the basics, so that people get a more feeling of, this is what we're talking about. Okay, now I understand when you talk about resources. I think there's it's good to make people comfortable and not drawing people to the black hole of technology. You know that you have to be a super expert before you understand anything that the other guys are talking about. This is my thought, at least. Anything else on problems or getting started on FHIR or any existing challenges?
And since we only have a few minutes left, I'd also love to open it up if there are any topics that you want to hear more focused in on or discussed in greater detail. We are always very open to additional ideas for webinars for whatever can be helpful to the community. So either of those topics are, yeah, we're happy to hear from you.
Can I get just a quick show of hands of who is actually working with FHIR now, whether as an analyst and they have developers or someone is learning this already? If you could just raise the hand. Yep. I see 2 hands, 3 hands, 4 hands. Out of 17, minus me, 16. Anyone also this? Are the others not doing it? Anyone is not doing FHIR yet, but is planning to do it? I don't see any hands. Yeah, so yeah, going forward, I think it would be, it's interesting that we have more and more feedback from the community to see what else, what materials do we prepare. So let's say in a couple of months we have a new webinar. So what is what are the things that we should have the webinar about? For example, is it about creating an implementation guide? We have already that. Is it about how do we set up a governance infrastructure or a governance for our own FHIR specifications? Because otherwise it's just a technical thing, but FHIR and standardization is never just a technical thing. It needs, you know, governance, who approves what, how do we version things? So all those things would be, it will be interesting to have those discussions and see what resonates with people, what people want to hear about and what people want to discuss about. A few weeks ago, we had someone saying, I was talking, and then they said, that's nice, but we have done this. And I was delighted to see what they had done in the implementation guides. So it would be interesting to indeed collect some thoughts on what are people worried about. You know, is it questions like, is FHIR different from SNOMED? Can they coexist? Yes, let's discuss it. What is the role of FHIR in all this fancy data access, data everywhere? How does it match our concerns with privacy and security? Awesome stuff to discuss. How do I get my country and my manager and my ministry aware that there's a thing called FHIR? Or how do I match the FHIR thing with the open air thing? So how do those things work together? Or how can I implement this? Or I have a search problem, I cannot do this. Or how do I do my mapping? So there's so much to be done there. It would be really interesting to get feedback from the community. So please reach out to us in any way you want, through us or through the chat.fhir.org. Just create an account and just say, we have this thing. We heard this guy talking about nonstop about FHIR. We want to get more information on this or that topic. It would be really interesting for us to see what are the needs, what are the experience that you also want to share. With that, set up for a larger audience for implementation guides. Yeah, Jenny, good stuff. I think we can do that. So there's so much attention to FHIR implementation guides that I think we need to put some love into that and some orientation, like how do we get this working? How do we start? How do we version? How do we publish those? That's an interesting topic indeed that we can do. There's actually a couple of cool new things that we can do on FHIR. No one asked, so I did not share. But like, how can you make your implementation guide look really fancy by having very detailed templates for things? It's quite impressive what you can do with computable specifications. So would be nice to share some of these things. I can share some of the teasers next time, but yeah, please bring up those topics. Jenny, point taken. I will follow up on how can we make the whole implementation guide ecosystem even better and more robust, and how can people get started on it. With that, any other questions, any other topics that we can address in 2 minutes? If not, over to you, Maria. Oh, you're on mute.
I really was, thanks. I had one last question for you. If you ever get headaches from holding all this knowledge in your head, if that ever wears
No,
on you.
it's not. The good thing is that I don't have to keep anything. It's everything is on chat.
It's all
So I
out
don't
there.
worry. And there's lots of people that are working on this. So I focus on a couple of things, more on the tooling. So if you ask me something about CQL, I would say, talk to Luke. He knows much better than I do. Or if someone says talk to terminologies, I don't know about that. If you talk about the business analysis and FHIR, I would say, Jenny has ideas. So, and that's the cool thing. I mean, I'm just the talking head, let's say. It's good to have this community, and really FHIR is about the community. So it's wonderful to see that if you need something, someone will help.
Well, regardless, you always do a great job at these. So thank you so much for presenting, answering all these questions. And of course, also thank you to everybody who joined us. And I really hope that you found this discussion helpful. Please feel free to reach out to me or Jose or whomever if you have any follow-up questions. And we hope to see you at another webinar coming up soon. And thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, wherever you may be.
Thank you all.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.